The Demonology of King James, Part 3. But who dare take upon him to punish them if no man can be sure to be free from their unnatural invasions? We ought not the more of that restrain from virtue, that the way whereby we climb thereunto be narrow and perilous. But besides that, as there is no kind of person so subject to receive harm of them, as these are of infirm and weakened faith, which is the best buckler against such invasions, so have they so small power over none, as over such a zealously and earnestly pursue them, without spiring for any worldly respect. Then they are like the pestilence, which smite these with most sickness, that flieth furthest and apprehend deepest the peril thereof. It is even so with them, for either it is able to them to use any false cure upon a patient, except the patient first believe in their power, and so hazard the tinsel of his own soul, nor yet can they have less power to hurt any, than such as condemns most their doings, so being it comes of faith, and not of any vain arrogance in themselves. But what is their power against the magistrate? Less or greater, according as he deals with them. For if he be so slothful towards them, God is very able to make them instruments to waken and punish his sloth. But if he be the contrary, he, according to the just law of God, and allowable law of all nations, will be diligent in examining and punishing them. God will not permit their master to trouble or hinder so good a work. But after they be once in the hands and confinement, have they any further power in their craft? That is according to the form of their detention. If they be put apprehended and detained of any private person, upon other private respects, their power no doubt either in escaping or in doing hurt is no less than it ever was before. But if on the other part their apprehended and detention be by the lawful magistrate upon the just respects of their guiltiness in the craft, their power is then no greater than before that ever they meddled with their master. For when God begins justly to strike his lawful lieutenants, it is not in the devil's power to defraud or bereave him of his office, or effect of his power and revenging scepter. But would never the master come to visit them after they be once apprehended and put in confinement? That is according to the estate that these miserable wretches are in. For if they obstinate in still denying, he will not spare, when he finds time to speak with them, either if he find them in any comfort, to fill them more and more with the vain hope of some manner of relief, or else if he find them in a deep despair, by all means to augment the same, and to persuade them by some extraordinary means to put themselves down, which very commonly they do. But if they be penitent and confess, God will permit them to trouble them any more with his presence. God will not permit him to trouble them any more with his presence and allurements. It is not good using his counsel, I see then, but I will earnestly know when he appears to them in prison, what form does he then take? Diverse forms, even as he used to do at other times upon them. For as I told you, speaking of magic, he appears to that kind of craftsmen ordinarily in a form, according as they agree upon it among themselves, or if they be but apprentices, according to the quality of their circles or conjurations. Yet to these capped creatures he appears as he pleases, and if he finds, best for his humors. For even at the public conventions he appears to diverse of them in diverse forms, as we have found by the difference on their confessions in that point. For he deluding them with vain impressions in that air makes himself to seem more terrible to the grosser sort, that they may thereby be moved to fear and reverence him the more, and less monstrous and uncouth again to the craftier sort, lest otherwise they might stare and shudder at his ugliness. How can he be felt, as they confess they have done him, if his body be but of air? I hear little of that among their confessions, yet he may make himself palpable, either by assuming any dead body and using the ministry thereof, or else by diluting as well their sense of feeling as seeing, which is not possible to him to do, since all of our senses, as we are so weak, and even by ordinary sickness, will be oftentimes deluded. But I will spare one word further yet concerning his appearing to them in prison, which is this: may any that chance to be present at that time in the prison see him as well as they? Sometimes they will, and sometimes not, as it pleases God. Has the devil then the power to appear to any other except to such as all his sworn disciples, especially since all oracles and such like kinds of illusions were taken away and abolished by the coming of Christ? Although it be true indeed that the brightness of the gospel at this coming scaled the clouds of all of these gross errors in paganism, yet that these abusing spirits cease not ever since as sometimes to appear. Daily experience teaches us, indeed, this difference is to be marked between the forms of Satan conversing visibly in the world, for of the two different forms thereof, the one of them by the spreading of the evangel and conquest of the white horse, and in the 6th chapter of the book of Revelation, is much hindered and become rare thereby. This, his appearing to any Christians, troubling of them outwardly or possessing of them constrainedly, the other of them is become commoner and more used since then. I mean by their unlawful arts, whereupon our whole purpose has been. This we find by experience in this hour to be true, for as we know, more ghosts and spirits were seen that tongue can tell in time of blind papistry in these countries, where now by the contrary a man shall scarcely all his time hence once of such things, and yet were these unlawful arts far rarer at the time, and never were so much heard of, nor so rife as they are now. What should be the cause of that? The diverse nature of our sins procures at the justice of God diverse source of punishments answering thereunto. And thereunto in the time of the pageantry, our fathers erring grossly and through ignorance, the mist of errors overshadowed the devil to walk the more familiarity among them, and as it were by childish and frightening terrors to mock and accuse their childish errors. By the contrary, we now being sound of religion and in our life rebelling to our profession of faith, God justly by the sin of rebellion, as Samuel calls it, accuses our life for so willfully fighting against our profession. Since you are entered now to speak of the appearing of the spirits, I would be glad to hear your opinion in that matter, for many deny that any such spirits can appear in these days, as I have said. Doubtlessly, who denies the power of the devil would likewise deny the power of God, if they could for shame. For since the devil is the very contrary opposite to God, there can be no better way to know God than by the contrary, as by one's power through a creature to admire the power of the great Creator, by falsehood of the one to consider the truth of the other, by the injustice of the one to consider the justice of the other, and by the cruelty and the one to consider the mercifulness of the other, and so forth, in all the rest of the essence of God and qualities of the devil. But I fear indeed there be over many Sadducees in this world that deny all kinds of spirits for convincing of those error. There is cause enough, if there were no more, that God should permit at some time spirit visible to make known. I pray you now, then go forward in telling what you think fabulous or may be trusted in that case. That kind of the devil's conversing in the earth may be divided in 4 different kinds, whereby he frightens and troubles the bodies of men. For of the abusing of the soul I have spoken already. The first is where spirits trouble some houses or solitary places. The second, where spirits follow upon certain persons and at diverse hours trouble them. The third, when they enter within them and possess them. The fourth is these kinds of spirits that are called vulgarity. The fourth is these kinds of spirits that are called vulgarly the fairies. Of the 3 former kinds, you already heard how they artificially be made by witchcraft to trouble folk. Now, it's rest to speak of their natural coming, as it were, when not raised by witchcraft, but generally I must forewarn you of one thing before I enter into this purpose, that is, that although in my discoursing of them I divided them into diverse kinds, you must notwithstanding thereof note my phrase of speaking in that, for doubtlessly they are in effect, but all one kind of spirits, who for abusing the more of mankind take on these sundry shapes and use diverse forms of outward action, as if some were of nature better than others. Now I return to my purpose. As to the first kinds of these spirits, they were called by the ancients by diverse names according to their actions that they were. For if they were spirits that hunted some houses by appearing in diverse and horrible forms and making great din, they were called lemurs or spectra. If they appeared in likeness of any deceased to some friends of this, they were called ambre mortorium. And so innumerably styling they got according to their actions, as I have said already, as we see by experience how many stylings they have given them in our language in the like manner of the appearing of these spirits are certified by the scriptures where the prophet Isaiah chapters 13 and 34, threatening the destruction of Babylon and Edom, Isaiah 13 and Jeremiah 50, declares that it should not only be wrecked, but shall become so great a solitude as it shall be the habitation of outlets and of Zim and Im, which are the proper Hebrew names for these spirits. This why they can hunt solitary places. It is by reason that they may frighten and shake the more faith of such of them alone, frightening such places. For our nature is such, as in the company we are not so soon moved to any such kind of fear, as being solitarily, which the devil knowing well enough, he will not therefore assail us, but we are weak. And besides that, God will not permit him so to dishonor the societies and company of Christians, as in public times and places to walk visibly among them. On the other part, when he troubles certain houses that are dwelt in, it is a sure token either of gross ignorance or of some gross and slanderous sins among the inhabitants thereof, which God by that extraordinary rod punishes. But by what way of passage can these spirits enter these houses, seeing they allege that they will enter, door or window being shut? They will choose the passage for their entrance according to the form that they are in at that time. For if they have assumed a dead body whereunto they lodge themselves, they can easily open without then any door or window and enter thereat. And if they enter as a spirit only, and place where the air may come in as is large enough an entry for them, for as I have said before, a spirit can occupy no quantity. And God will permit these wicked spirits to trouble the rest of a dead body before the resurrection thereof, or if he will so, I think it should be of the reprobate only. What more is the rest troubled of a dead body when the devil carries it out of the grave to serve him turn for a space? Then when the witches take it up and disjoin it, or when swine root up the graves, the rest of them that the scriptures speak of is not meant by the local remaining continually in one place, but by their resting from their travels and miseries of this world until their latter conjunction again with the soul at that time to receive full glory in both. And that the devil may use as well as the ministry of the bodies of the faithful in these cases, as of the unfaithful there is no inconvenience, for his hauntings with their bodies after they are dead can no wise defile them. In respect of the soul absence, and for any dishonor it can be unto them, by what reason can it be greater than the hanging, beheading, or many such harmful deaths that good men will suffer? For there is nothing in the bodies of the faithful more worthy of honor, or freer from corruption by nature, than in these of the unfaithful, until the time they be purged and glorified in the latter day, as is daily seen by the vile disease and corruptions that the bodies of the faithful are subject unto, as you will see clearly proved when I speak of the possessed and the domaniacs. Yet there are some that affirm to have hunted such places where these spirits are alleged to be and can never hear or see anything. I think well, for that is only reserved to the secret knowledge of God, whom he will permit to see such things and whom not. But where these spirits hunt and trouble any houses, what is the best way to banish them? By two means only the remedy of such thing be procured. The one is the ardent prayer to God, both of these persons that are troubled with them, and of the church whereof they are. The other is the purging of themselves by amendment of life from such sins as have procured the extraordinary plague. And what means then these kind of spirits when they appear as the shade of a person newly dead or to die to his friends? When they appear upon that occasion, they are called wraiths in our language. Among the pagans, the devil used that much to make them believe that it was some good spirit that appeared to them then, either to forewarn them of the death of their friend, or else to discover unto them the will of the deceased, or what is the way of his slaughter, as it is written in the book of the Histories Prodigious. And this way he easily deceived the pagans, because they knew not God, and to that same effect it is that now appears in the manner to some ignorant Christians, for he dare not so delude any that know that neither can the spirit of the deceased return to his friend, or yet an angel use such forms. And are not our werewolves one of these sort of spirits also, that hunt and trouble some houses or dwelling places? There has indeed been an old opinion of such like things, for by the Greeks they were called lycanthropoli, which signifies man-wolves. But to tell you simply my opinion in this, if any such thing has been, I take it to have proceeded but of a natural superabundance of melancholy, which, as we read, that is, has made some think themselves pitchers, and some horses, and some one kind of a beast or other. It has so vitiated the imaginary and memory of some as interuliala. It has so highly occupied them that they have thought themselves very wolves indeed at times, and so have counterfeited their actions in going on their hands and feet, pressing to devour women and children, fighting and snatching with all the town dogs, and in using such like other brutish actions, and so to become beasts by a strong apprehension, as Nebuchadnezzar was 7 years. Daniel chapter 4. But as to their having and hiding of their hard and shelly slaws, I take it to be but learned uncertain report, the author of all lies. Come forward now to the rest of these kinds of spirits. As to the next two kinds, that is, either these that outwardly trouble and follow some persons, or else inwardly possess them, I will conjoin them in once, because as well the causes are alike in the persons they are permitted to trouble, as also the way whereby they be remedied and cured. What kind of persons are they that are used to being so troubled? Two kinds especially, either such as being guilty of grievous offenses, God punishes by that horrible kind of scourge, or else being persons of that best nature peradventure that you shall find in all the country about them, God permits them to be troubled in that sort, for the trial of their patience and waking up of their zeal, for admonishing of the beholders not to trust over and much in themselves, since they are made of no better stuff, and peradventure blotted with some similar sins, with no smaller sins, as Christ said, speaking of them upon whom the tower in Siloam fell, Luke chapter 13, and forgiving likewise to the spectators matters to praise God, that they, meriting no better, are yet spared from being corrected in that fearful form. These are the good reasons for the part of God, which apparently moves him so to permit the devil to trouble such persons. But since the devil has never a contrary respect in all the actions that God employs him in, which is, I pray you, the end and mark he shoots at in this turn, it is to obtain one of two things thereby, if he may. The one is the tinsel of their life, by inducing them to such perilous places at such times as he either follows or possesses them, which may procure the same. and such like, so far as God would permit him by tormenting them to weaken their bodies and cast them into incurable diseases. The other thing he wishes to obtain by troubling of them is the tinsel of their soul, by enticing them to mistreat and blaspheme God, either by the intolerableness of their torments, as he is said to have done with Job, Job chapter 10, or else for his promising unto them to leave them troubling of them, in case they would so do, as is known by experience at this time, by the confessions of a young one that was so troubled. Since you have spoken now of both these kind of spirits, comprehending them in one, I must now go back again in casting some questions of every one of these kinds in particular. And first, for that these follow certain persons, you know that there are two sorts of them. One sort that troubles and torments the persons that they hunt with, and the other sort, they are serviceable unto them in all kinds of their necessities, and omit never to forewarn them of any sudden peril that they are to be in. And so, in this case, I will understand whether both these sorts be but wicked and damned spirits, or if the last sort be rather angels, as should appear by their actions, sent by God to assist such as he specially favors. For it is written in the scriptures that God sends legions of angels to guard and to watch over his elect. Genesis chapter 32, first book of Kings chapter 6, Psalms chapter 34. I know well enough wherefrom that error which you allege has proceeded, for it was the ignorant pagans that were the fountain thereof, who, for they knew not God, they forced in their own imagination every man to be still accompanied with two spirits, whereof they called the one genius bonus, the other genius malus. The Greek called them endaimona and kakodomona. Wherefore the former said, persuaded him to all the good he did, the other enticed him all the evil. But praise be God, we that are Christians and walk not among the simmering conjectures of a man, know well enough that it is the good Spirit of God only, who is the fountain of all goodness, that persuades us to the thinking or doing of any good, and that is our corrupted flesh and Satan that entices us to the contrary. And yet the devil, for confirming in the heads of ignorant Christians that error first maintained among the pagans, he bides among the first kind of spirits that I speak of, appeared in the time of papistry and blindness, and hunted diverse houses, without doing any evil, but doing as it were necessary task up and down the house, as the spirit they called Brownie in our language, who appeared like a rough man. Yea, some were so blinded as to believe that their house was all the more prosperous, as they called it, that such spirits resorted there. But since the devil's intention in all of the actions is ever to do well, what evil was there in that form of doing, since their actions outwardly were good? Was it not evil enough to deceive simple ignorant, in making them to take him for an angel of light, and so to account of God's enemy as of their particular friend, whereby the contrary are we that are Christians ought assuredly to know that since the coming of Christ in the flesh and establishing of his church by the apostles, all miracles, visions, prophecies, and appearances of angels or good spirits are ceased, which served only for the first sowing of faith and planting of the church, where now the church being established, and the white horse whereof I spoke before, having made his conquest, the law and prophets are thought sufficient to serve us or make us inexcusable, as Christ says in his parable of Lazarus and the rich man, Luke 26. The next question that I will speak is likewise concerning the first of these two kinds of spirits that you have conjoined, and it is this. You know how it is commonly written and reported that among the rest of the source of spirits that follow certain persons, there is one monstrous than all the rest, in respect as it is alleged that they have intercourse naturally with them whom they trouble and hunt with. And therefore I would know in two things your opinion herein. First, if such things can be, and if next, if it be, whether there be a difference of sexes among these spirits or not. The abominable kind of the devil's abusing of men and women was called of old incubi or succubi, according to the difference of the sexes that they had congress with. By two means this great kind of abuse might possibly be performed. That one, when the devil, only a spirit distilling out of the sperm of a dead body, abuses them that way, that not clearly seeing any shape or feeling anything, but that which he so conveys in that part, as we read in the monastery of nuns, which were burnt for their being in that way abused. The other means when he borrows a dead body and so visibly, and as it seems unto them naturally, as a man copulates with them. But it is to be noted that in whatsoever way he uses it, that sperm seems intolerably cold to the person's abused. For if he steals out the nature of a living person, it cannot be so quickly carried, but it will both lose the strength and heat by the way, which it could never have had for lack of agitation, which in the time of procreation is procurer and wakener up of those two natural qualities. And if he be occupying the dead body as his lodging, expel the same out thereof in the due time, it must likewise be cold by the participation with the qualities of the dead body whereout of it comes. And whereas you inquire if these spirits be divided in sexes or not, I think that the rules of philosophy may easily resolve a man of the contrary, for it is a sure principle of that art that nothing can be divided in sexes except such living bodies as must have had a natural seed to generate by. But we know spirits have no seed proper to themselves, nor yet can the engender one with another. How is it then that they say various monsters have been gotten by that way? These tales are nothing but annales fabulae, for they have no semen of their own. I have shown you already, and that the cold semen of a dead body can work nothing in generation. It is more than plain, as being already dead of itself as well as the rest of the body is, wanting the natural heat, and such other natural operations as are necessary for working that effect, and in case such a thing were possible, which were all utterly against all rules of nature, it would breed no monster, but only such a natural offspring as would have become between that man or woman and that other abused person, in case they both being alive had ado each other. For the devil's part therein is but the naked carrying or expelling of the substance, and so it could not participate with no quality of the same. Indeed, it is possible to the craft of the devil to make a woman's belly to swell after he hath that way abused her, which he may do either by stripping up her own humor or by herbs, as we see beggars daily do. And when the time of their delivery should come to make her labor with great anguish, like unto the natural course, and then subtly to slip into the midwife's hand sticks, stones, or some monstrous child brought forth from some other place. But this is more reported and guessed at by others than believed by me. But what is the cause that this kind of abuse is thought to be most common in such wild parts of the world as Lapland and Finland, or in our North Isles of Orkney and Shetland? Because where the devil finds great ignorance and barbarity, there assails he most grossly, as I gave you the reason whereof. There were the more witches, as I gave you the reason wherefore there were more witches of womankind than men. Can any be so happy as to give their willing consent to the devil's vile abusing them in this form? Yea, some of the witches have confessed that he has persuaded them to give their willing consent thereunto, that he may thereby have them entangled the deeper in his snares. But as the other compared sort, it is to be pitied and prayed for, so it is this most highly to be punished and detested. It is not the thing which we call the mare, which takes folks sleeping in their beds, and kinds of these spirits whereof you are speaking. No, that is but a natural sickness, which the medicines have given the same name of incubus unto, because it being a thick phlegm falling into our breast upon the heart where we are sleeping, intercedes so our vital spirits and all takes all power from us, as to make us think that they were some unnatural burden or spirit lying upon us and holding us down. Well, I have told you now all my doubts, and you have satisfied me therein concerning the first of these two kinds of spirits that you have conjoined. Now I am to inquire only two things at you concerning the last kind, I mean the demoniacs. That first is, whereby shall these possessed folks be discerned from them that are troubled with a natural frenzy or mania? The next is, how can it be that they be remedied by the Baptist Church, whom we count as heretics? It should appear that one devil should not cast out another, for then would his kingdom be divided in itself, as Christ said in Matthew chapter 12 and in the book of Mark chapter 3. As to your first question, there are diverse symptoms whereby that heavy trouble may be discerned from a natural sickness, and especially three, omitting the diverse vain signs that the papists attribute it unto, such as the raging at holy water, their fleeing aback from the cross, their not abiding the hearing of God named, and innumerable such like vain things that were alike tiresome and worthless to recite. But to come to these three symptoms then, whereof I spoke, I account the one of them to be the incredible strength of the possessed creature, which will far exceed the strength of 6 of the stoutest and strongest of any men that are not so troubled. The next is the rising up so far of the patient's breast and belly, with such an unnatural stirring and vehement agitation within them, and such an iron hardness of his sinews, so stiffly bended out, that it were not possible to prick out, as it were, the skin of any person. So far, so mightily works devil in all of the members and senses of his body, he being locally within the same, although of his soul and affections thereof, he has no more power than over any other man's. The last is the speaking of different languages, which the patient is known by them that were acquainted with them never to have learned, and that a greater motion being in his breast than in his mouth. But from this last symptom is accepted such as altogether in the time of their possessing, bereft of all of their senses, being possessed with a dumb and blind spirit, whereof Christ relieved one in the 12th chapter of Matthew. As it is to your next demand, it is the first to be doubted if the papists or any non-professing the only true religion can relieve any of that trouble. And next, in that case, they can, upon what respects it is possible unto them. As to the former, upon two reasons it is grounded. First, that it is known so many of them to be counterfeit, which deception the clergyman invents for confirming of their rotten religion. The next is that by experience we find that few who are possessed indeed are fully cured by them, but rather the devil is content to release the body hurting of them for a short space, thereby to obtain perpetual hurt of the souls of so many, that by these false miracles may be induced or confirmed in the profession of that erroneous religion, even as I have told you before that he does in the false cures or casting off of disease by witches. As to the other part of the argument, in case they can, which rather with reverence of the learned thinking or otherwise, I am induced to believe by reason of the faithful report that men sound of religion have made according to their sight thereof. I think if it so be, I say these may be the respects whereupon the papists may have that power. Christ gave a commission and power to the apostles to cast out devils, which they accordingly thereupon put in execution. The rules he had them more observed in that action were fasting and prayer, and the action itself was to be done in his name. The power of theirs proceeded not then of any virtue in them, but only in them who has directed them, as was clearly proved by Judas, his having as great power in that commission as any of the rest. It is easy then to be understood that the casting out the devil is by the virtue of fasting and prayer and invoking of the name of God. Even though many imperfections be in the person that is the instrument, as Christ himself teaches us of the power that false prophets shall have to cast out devils. Matthew chapter 7. It is no wonder then, these respects as the action being considered, that it may be possible to the papists, though erring in various points of religion, to accomplish this if they use the right form prescribed by Christ herein. For what the worse is the action, that they err in other things more than their baptism is the worse than they err in the other sacrament, and have added many vain frets to the baptism itself. Surely it is no little wonder that God should permit the bodies of any of the faithful to be so dishonored as to be a dwelling place to the unclean spirit. There it is which I had told you now, which proved and strengthened my argument of the devil's entering in the dead bodies of the faithful. For if he is permitted to enter into the living bodies, even when they are adjoined with the soul, how much more will God permit him to enter into the dead carcasses, which is no more man, but the filthy and the corruptible case of man? For as Christ says, it is not anything that enters within man that defiles him, but only that which proceeds and comes out of him. Mark chapter 7.